Hey guys, Mr. Rubin here. This is the first, I guess you could say, major video, although it's not going to be super major. I'm going to try to be fairly brief here, but it's the first video that I'm doing for either of the classes which I'm teaching with you guys now, which are going to be both American Lit and Shakespeare. So this is the American Lit video. So if you're watching this, you should be an American Lit. If you're not, I sent you the wrong video or something, so don't finish watching it and send me a message and we'll get it figured out. But anyway, this is American literature, and here we are moving into the fourth quarter, and obviously it's going to be a little different than anyone wanted or hoped. This has been an incredible quarter for me so far. It was an incredible semester, I guess is what I mean to say. And I had some really great students, and everybody was getting so involved and so much incredible insight, and it's just a real shame for all of us that we can't keep having that discussion that we're having. However, we'll try to do what we can, and one of the things I'm going to do this week is send out an invitation to a WebEx meeting so that hopefully we can meet and talk to each other through our computers. So I'll probably try to do that once a week for each class for the rest of the year. So this is American Lit, as I was saying earlier, and I got some notes here, just some brief things that I'm going to go over with you guys really quickly. So with American literature, what we're going to be mostly doing in here is focusing on interpreting literature like we were doing beforehand, and also do some writing. Because of the limitations of the way the class is going to be now, I'm not going to be able to do really in-depth writing, so we'll kind of keep the writing assignments more basic. Nonetheless, not necessarily, I guess, basic, but a little shorter. Nonetheless, make out of it what you want. If you guys want to write a 10-page paper and send it to me and say, Ruben, will you look at this and tell me what you think? I'll do it, Please be, feel free to communicate with me as much as you want this quarter, guys. Send me an email anytime. And if you just need to vent, I know everybody's a little stressed out right now, including myself, because this is a weird time that we're in. So, this is American Lit, and one of the things we're going to look at here in this class is modern literature, and we call it modern literature. I'm not trying to get you to think about it like, okay, it's modern in the sense that Justin Bieber is a modern part of our culture, or Brad Pitt or anything like this. Modernism, do you remember how we talked about romanticism last quarter, and romanticism had these different characteristics, and then we defined that literature that came out of that period as the romantic literature? So we're talking about modern literature, and it's a period of art in Europe and England and America, roughly from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And the literature that came out of that time period is, in my opinion, like the epoch or the high point or the zenith of literature. It doesn't really get any better than what was coming out during that time period. You've got Faulkner's work, Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, the great British writer, James Joyce, the Irish writer who you guys have heard me talk about in the past, Joseph Conrad, the British writer. The list goes on and on. And one of the things that modern literature tries to do is really examine the way stories are told. So a word that I want you guys to get used to this quarter is a word that's called epistemology. E-P-I-S-T-E-M-O-L-O-G-Y. Epistemology. And epistemology is the branch of philosophy that examines the nature of knowledge. So when we're talking about epistemological questions, we're talking about questions that have to do with what do we know and how do we know it, the validity or the truth of what we know. Those are epistemological questions, okay? So anytime I say, all right, guys, epistemologically speaking, it means I'm talking about like in terms of our perception of knowledge and how we see things and whether or not that's true or not true, so forth and so on. Great filmmaker that I love, David Cronenberg, one time said that reality is neurological, meaning we perceive the world through our mind, right? And so the way we interpret reality is going to be the way that we intellectually see it in our brain, how we smell, how we see, how we touch and taste. So the way a person perceives the world is a lot different than how a dog perceives the world, right? So a human being's perception of the world, neurologically speaking, is a lot more highly intellectual than the way a dog will see it, reflective and so forth. So literature in the modern era starts to question these things. How are stories told? how do we interpret stories that we hear? And one of the things you see in modern literature is kind of this, they call it, this one literary critic called it the drama of the telling. How is the story told? The great story of the modern era, one of the great novels is The Great Gatsby. And The Great Gatsby is the story of J. Gatsby, but it's told through the point of view of another character named Nick Carraway. So anytime we're hearing the story, we're conscious of the fact that we're hearing Nick's interpretation of the story. So literature that came out prior to modernism, you tended to have narrators that you could trust, and they had the omniscient point of view, and they could see into any character's mind. In modern literature, we start to see limitations in how we see stories. We can't see in this character's mind. We're getting the story through character A about character B. So what's the truth? So these stories are going to force you to question things epistemologically. One of the magnus opuses, one of the great masterpieces of the modern era, is William Faulkner's novel As I Lay Dying. The whole story is told from the perspective of 15 different characters that each have their own voice and their own perception of things and their own experiences that they've witnessed, and they tell it through 59 chapters in that book. So epistemologically speaking, that's a very experimental novel. A lot of times characters will be telling a story and they'll comment on how they're struggling to even tell the story. That happens a lot in Joseph Conrad's work. T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which I hope we can read this quarter, he'll flat out say during the narration of the poem, he flat out comes out and says, "It's impossible for me to say what I want to say." So you have this kind of struggle of characters trying to get out the truth when you read these stories, and I think that's a really cool element of modernism. And this idea of uncertainty, as that we now live in very uncertain times, I mean, you see how relevant the modern literature is because it forces us to kind of realize the uncertainty of things and how can we operate within those realms. We have limitations in the way we see things and the way we hear things and in the way we're perceiving truth. So that's epistemological questions, modernism. That's what I wanted to reflect upon there with you guys. If things go as planned, we're going to read The Great Gatsby this quarter. I really, really want to read it with you guys. It's one of my top 10 favorite books of all time, and I look forward to teaching that every year. And with this radically awesome group of students that I have, I was really excited to dig into that literature with you guys. But if you feel anxious about that or really think we should maybe focus on short stories, send me an email and tell me why, and I'll take that into consideration. We're not going to start on The Great Gatsby this week anyway. I'm going to give you guys a couple of assignments this week, one of which is watching this video right now. But we'll start moving probably into Gatsby next week, assuming we go on with it. The other thing I really want you guys to think about is the American dream, okay? The American dream is something that we're going to talk about this quarter. The American dream is the idea that success can be obtained by anyone as long as he or she does the right thing, okay? So essentially, that's the American dream. You can be successful in this country if you do the right thing and you work hard. The work ethic, the Puritan work ethic, going back to what we talked about last quarter, is an important part of the American ideal. But there's this sentiment, this belief in this country that if you do work hard, you will ultimately be able to achieve success. So keep that in mind. The other idea with the American dream is people tend to have faith in the institutions and the traditions of America, and they have faith in American progress and faith in the American ideals and so forth. With modern literature being so hell-bent on exploring the uncertainty of things, they're also going to explore the idea of the uncertainty of the American dream. Is the American dream really a certainty or not? And that's what we're going to do a little informal writing on this week. I want you guys to think about the American dream, whether or not you believe in it, people that you've seen who've lived the American dream, and people you've seen who have not succeeded in achieving the American dream, or perhaps that the American dream has failed. So, to reiterate, we talked about epistemology, epistemological questions that have to do with knowledge and interpretation of the world, and what we can assume to be truth versus what we cannot assume to be truthful. Modernism looks at the actual narrative of stories and we re-explore literature through the eyes of characters who have limitations on how they see things, and modernism reflects on that a lot. And of course, it reflects on its times. So when you read early 1900s American literature, you're going to see a lot of stuff about World War One, the lost generation, as Hemingway talked about, because this whole generation of people died off in World War One, which was really intense. And you're going to have, the Great Gatsby's about the 1920s and the Jazz Age, and some of the things that were relevant during that time: women getting the right to vote, prohibition, which limited or made alcohol illegal, so forth. All that stuff's going to be reflected in the literature of that time period. We also talked about the American dream. As far as writing's going to go this quarter, we're not going to do journals every day like we used to. There will be mostly probably more informal writing, but there will be some formal writing. But I'll always, probably make that, instead of like a 5-page paper, it will be like a 1-pager. So each week, check your Google Classroom at the beginning of the week, and I'll post the majority of the work that's going to be assigned that week right on that early part of the week on Monday. Might be something else I post later, but this week, everything you see on Monday is all I'm going to have you to be expected to do. So with all that in mind, I guess I'll just sign off. I don't want to talk too long here, and I got a potato that I'm dying to dig into. So, you guys have a great week. Email me if you want to talk. Don't be stressed out, because it doesn't help. Although it's only natural to be a little stressed out. I miss you guys. I wish we were at school, but hey, man, what can you do? See you guys.